Hello, Oscillator Sync here. Granular synthesis or granular processing is the idea of taking a sample and then rather than playing back the entire thing, instead we play back small looping chunks of that sample, grains to use the terminology. And depending on what part of the sample we're looping, and other parameters of the grains, their shape, their panning, their size, we can, for example, with larger grains, take a loop and start to recontextualize it in interesting ways. Or with smaller, tighter, more dense grains playing back, we can create entirely new abstract textures and timbres. The instrument that you see before you here is the Tempura from Beetlcrab. It's an instrument that I met for the first time in person at Superbooth earlier this year, and Beetlecrab have kindly sent me over this unit for the purposes of making videos on it. I'm not being paid otherwise, but I do get to keep this unit, so I will mark this as a sponsored video. When this arrived, I had to kind of learn the instrument like I normally do, and then try to work out what sort of video I want to make with it. And it would be very easy, effortless, practically with this instrument to just make dreamy, twinkly, ambient soundscapes, of course. Granular synthesis is fantastic for that. But as I delved more into the functionality and got to know the instrument and understand how it works, it came to me that I think this is the missing link for me in a live setup that I've been wanting to put together for a while. So I want to talk about it as kind of part effect, part instrument, part looper and transition maker. A lot of different roles, but specifically in the world of live performance. And I will dive into that particular setup, but before we do that, it's probably worth spending just a few minutes talking about the architecture of the Tempura, because one of the nice things about granular synthesis, as opposed to some other paradigms like, say, subtractive analog synths, is that there's a lot of scope for creators of instruments to be playful with their design and architecture, and the Tempura is certainly that. So I want to introduce some key concepts before we get on to the live performance stuff, but we'll try and keep it as brief as, as an Oscillator Sync video ever can be. From an architectural standpoint, there are kind of two main concepts you need to understand about the Tempura. The first is tracks. So we have this 8x8 grid, and if we consider them vertically, what you have are 8 tracks onto which you can load samples. So in my case, I've loaded 8 different samples that we can play at the moment by dragging my finger, but we'll get to why that is in just a second. But we have 8 different samples loaded into the 8 tracks. How you get these samples in here, there are multiple different ways. You can just load them from the internal storage or an SD card. You can also sample directly into the unit as well, which will become extremely relevant when we talk about the live use. The other concept that we need to be aware of is the idea of emitters. And emitters are the things that make the grains that we can hear. Essentially, you can think of them a bit like a small tape head looking at just a small section of a tape sample, mixing the metaphors here. And that's what these things that I'm touching the lovely grid and there's something appearing, right? Now, you'll notice that if I play the grid, or place emitters, as it were, we're not hearing any sound. And that's because the emitters define the behavior, but you still need to play notes in order for them to actually start making the sound. So I can place a couple of emitters and then I can play a note and the emitters start emitting the grains. The emitters can be configured in a lot of different ways, and you have 4 different types of emitters that you can define different behaviors for. Each of these emitters can also respond to a different MIDI channel. So I'm just using this little onboard keyboard here, but you can quite happily set Tempura up to be 4-part multi-timbre, receiving different MIDI from different channels. In terms of the parameters that we can set for the different emitters, there's quite a lot. The first thing I'm going to do is just come in here and I want to set this parameter here to toggle placement, which allows me to put down a couple of these emitters and I don't have to keep holding down the top part of the keyboard here, as it were. There we go. And they are now emitting grains. We can start affecting the parameters here. So, for example, the grain length, we can make it much tighter. We can make them less dense. We could then make them longer, so they're playing like chunks of the sample instead. And in both of these cases, we can start to introduce it's called jitter, which is basically randomness on this parameter. So we can start introducing jitter to the length and the density. And what that's going to do for per emitter is start to randomize their parameters a little bit, which means things stop sounding so looped. The emitters can also be tempo synced or not, and you can actually blend between tempo synced grains and untempo synced grains. On this next page, we have this idea of spray. And what this does is it tells our emitters to start to encroach on their neighboring emitters. So if we do spray Y here and we start to bring this up, you'll see that the grains are starting to ping up and down from their current position, which then essentially means they are playing back different parts of the sample. We can also spray left and right, so they start playing back from the neighbouring tracks. So we start hearing some of the other samples. We can change the shape of the grains, so we can make them much squarer, so they have a hard end, or fade in, fade out, which is kind of where they were already. We have an electron style tone for the grains, a sort of bass width type filter as it would be on an electron box. There are other ways we can affect the timbre as well. We have the panning of the grains, so we can bring all of the grains over to one ear or over to the other, or kind of more excitingly in some cases we can add jitter to that, which means that the different grains are going to be panning left and right, creating a more varied just watching the volume there, a more varied stereo spread. We can start to introduce tuning spread, detune, just a little bit be nice. We can also snap this to octaves if we want to have it jumping up and down an octave at a time. There's also an effects section which we'll get to a little bit later, because that tuning's slightly aggressive. There we go. We can change the way things are placed, whether they are locked in place. So we can lock these grains in, these emitters rather, in place. And then if we use other emitters, we're not going to disable them as we drag our fingers across. We can also change how they fade in and out. We also have, separate to this, an envelope for the notes played as well. So there's quite a lot of stuff that we can adjust in here. On top of that, as I mentioned, we have a modulation section here for the envelope, but also we have a bunch of modulators, LFOs, sort of, but not only LFOs, 10 of them, which we can send to a bunch of different destinations throughout the synth. And we have an effects section as well, where we have a master filter, which you can bypass per emitter type. And then, of course, our reverb. Some delay. It's a chorus. And you can choose whether or not your emitters are going to those effects. What this leads to is a extremely flexible setup. It reminds me in a lot of ways like the Electron boxes, and particularly the Octatrack, not just because there's 8 tracks, in that you have a couple of well-defined systems, but how you arrange those systems allows you to do a bunch of different things. So you can absolutely set it up to be like a meditative, just ambient soundscape box where you can lock the keyboard and just let it do its thing. Or you can set it up to be a 4-part multi-timbral synth. Or you can set it up to because it can be tempo synced, you can use it to like slice loops and breaks. Les Cool Jeremy from Red Means Recording did a really fantastic video on exactly that, and it's a really great technique. But as I mentioned, I particularly want to talk about in this video how you can use it in a live concept, especially with sort of more of a live ambient drone setup, to do something that is at once an effect and an instrument and a looper and a way to do transitions and a way to evolve a performance. So let's dive into that use case. So the rest of this video, I want to show you this idea I have for this live setup. I'm doing this with a slightly sort of cut down version of the final idea. So I've got a couple of instruments plugged into a little mixer, and the output of that mixer is going into the input of Tempura, and we can monitor live through Tempura. That's not a problem. In reality, I would probably have this on a send and going back into a stereo return on a bigger mixer, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to keep things a bit more cut down. Also, what I'm going to show you is kind of the setup and the performance aspects all at the same time. We're going to be defining the different parameters for our emitters as we go, but in reality, all of that stuff would have been set up ahead of time, ahead of a performance. Before we do anything else, I'm in the setup menu, and on this page you can set up all of your sort of input and gain staging stuff. So you can select which inputs you are using. It can do line in or instrument level. It can do stereo line in as well as mono. I've got it on mono because I've only got mono output here. And it can also resample the current output of the device as well. So you can resample at the same time. I'm setting a recording threshold here because I'm mostly going to be using a threshold-based approach for recording, where you arm a track, and then as soon as that threshold volume-wise is breached, it will start recording. We've got the recording monitor level here, which is how you balance how much of what you're actually recording you hear coming directly out of the output of the Tempura. So if you're using this as an end of chain processor, which is what I'm doing in this setup, you can balance things there. If you were using this in a send and return, as is my ultimate goal, this would be turned to 0. There's also a bunch of different record modes. I'm going to be using replace for the start of this video, where basically when I record into one of the tracks, it will replace what was there previously, but you can have it overdub. And there is also a live grains mode, which we'll definitely also get to. So I'm just going to come into my emitters quickly, and this is just like the default patch at the moment, and I'm coming into my first emitter here, and I just want to change it to the toggle placement, just so I don't have to constantly hold down notes, as it were. And I'm also going to come into my keyboard here, and I'm going to set it to hold as well, so I can play a note and it will just hold the note, so I can turn it on and off that way. I'm also going to change my bass note to A, and that's just for convenience, because the default when you record new tracks, it will assume that you're playing in an A. You can change that when you do the sampling, but I don't want to faff with that, so I'm just going to make the assumption that this here is going to be the same pitch as what's coming in. So although we've got a note held and an emitter placed, currently we're not hearing anything, and that's because none of the tracks have any samples on. So to arm a track to record, we just go over to the sample page here, we hold the shift button, and we can arm each of the 8 tracks by pressing the button beneath the screens. So I'm going to arm a track here, and I'm just going to play in a little something on the lyra. And what you might have noticed, and you're hopefully noticing now, is that this emitter started making noise as soon as the recording passed that threshold, that place rather, on the track here. So it's something that starts happening straight away. And what this means is we can start to lay emitters on tracks and record into those tracks without interrupting the rest of the performance. So So if I wanted to record something else in, we're not going to lose what we've got going on there at the moment. So I can arm another track here. And that is also playing there. Now we can do a couple of things with these samples that might make things a little bit easier. You might not want to do this in a live performance, at least not if you're hearing the output straight away, I guess. But we can come in to edit the tracks, and we can do trimming, which is kind of seamless. What I want to do actually is normalize it so we get a bit more volume out of it, although we can change the volumes of the different emitters as well, just for making things a little bit easier for me. I'll do that now. Trim, normalize. Okay. Now at the moment, these emitters are kind of a bit boring. So let's tweak a couple of things here. Just turn them up a little bit, maybe. So for this first emitter, what I think I want is something which is sparse and just occasionally bringing something in and then letting it fade out. So I want my grain density to be low, first and foremost. Might be too low now. Okay, sure. Yeah, maybe a little bit too low. I want my grain length to maybe be a little bit longer. Cool. Now I don't want them to be so obviously looping, so I'm also going to add some jitter to both the length and also the density. And we should hear like pretty much straight away that they're now no longer sort of happening sort of concurrently. And one of them is sort of outlasting the other and stuff. Or jitter on the length. Yeah. I also probably want them to be pulling from different parts of the sample. We can do this a couple of different ways. Spray we've kind of already seen. There's also these relative controls which will basically offset the current position of the grains. So we can do a relative Y change. You can see that it's pulling it from different parts here. Now what we could do, rather than using the spray functionality, which is going to be better with a denser sound, I think most of the time, we can instead have this affected by an LFO. So we can come into our modulators here. You have an envelope for the played notes first, but then you have these modulators. And what I'll do is I'll maybe come free here, slow sine wave. We want to be really very, very slow, really. And we can set the target to be the E1 relative Y, set a size of maybe about 0.2, which is now going to start pulling those from different parts of the sample. So even with this kind of not quite looping thing happening already, we're now getting different parts of the sample, because this is kind of a freely or unsynced LFO. It's not going to kind of loop constantly to the same bit, which is cool. So coming back here, I think probably because we want it to be quite fading in, I think I want to make my grain shape even smoother, so we can turn the grain shape up a little bit so it should fade in and out of it sort of more smoothly. Might also just drop the tone down a little bit. So this is the tone of the emitter. There's also a filter that everything goes through or can go through in the Master Effects section. Just make this a little bit duller. And I also want to have it pan about a fair bit. So I'll add some jitter to the pan. So now that's not always sat in the middle anymore. Do a little bit of tune spread, although there's some tuning stuff happening in the sample already, but that might just give us a bit more sort of nice chorusing. The other thing we could do with the tune spread, I don't think I want to do it for this one, is we could snap it to fifths or octaves so that it is actually picking different octaves each time. I would also say, of course, that we can add other notes into the situation as well, if we want to. Might put another emitter down. There, maybe, yeah. So we've got the effects send set to full. So we'll add some effects, but I don't want it going through the master filter because I want to use that for doing other stuff, I think. Or do I? Okay, I'll turn off for the moment. So coming into the effects section here, we've got the filter, we've got the chorus, delay, and reverb. Let's start by slapping a bunch of reverb on there. Slightly more diffuse. Even bigger, slightly more of it, perhaps. Yeah, a bit of delay, not synchronized, and long. Cool, so we're starting to kind of establish a bit of a bed idea And if we want, we can, in real time, replace what is in these tracks as we start to evolve what our bed should be. So if we want, I could replace this one here, maybe something much higher. So I could arm this track here. And you can hear that before we've even finished recording, it started to pick up those new sample ideas. So we can sort of evolve our bed in our performance as we go. Right, I want to add something that's a bit more sort of percussive and twinkly. So let's move on to the next emitter type. I also, do you know what, I think I want to add even more jitter to the length and density for this one before I do that. It's still feeling a bit like it's looping too much to me. So a bit more jitter on the length, a bit more jitter on the density. I might also come into my modulator here and just increase how much that relative Y is moving through the sample. Cool, okay. So I'm going to record something with my little noisy box thing here. There you go. Lovely. I will go ahead and normalize that, although it might already have some fairly heavy transients in there already. That's the problem with piezo pickups. So we can choose this next emitter here, and yeah, we can start picking stuff up in there. So let's make some adjustments to this straight away. First things first, I don't want quite as much of it going to the effects. But I do want to be an octave up. Even less to the effects. Cool. So what do we want to do with this one? Well, I want it to be a bit more sort of twinkly, moving around a bit more. So first things first, grain density up and the grain length down. But quite a lot of randomness. On both of those. I want quite a lot of spray so I can just hold down one point and get loads of different stuff happening. Yeah. I want to take some of the bottom end out. Probably make the grains slightly choppier. And a load of panning jitter. Proper ASMR stuff. Bit of tuning spread. It's percussive anyway. In fact, we could even turn on the snap 8 and turn this up so we get the different octaves. Yes. There's the ASMR. Yes, very cool. I want to record something onto the next one along that's also sort of in that sort of vein. Some of that stuff, I think. maybe that emitter needs to go up a tiny bit. And what I want it to do, actually, when I play it, and we can set this up here, is there's my fade in, fade out. There it is. I want my fade out to be quite long. I want it to come in straight away when I touch it, but I want it to kind of carry on playing for a bit. Not quite as long as that. Now, one problem we might now encounter is that if I accidentally go over one of my blue emitters with a pink one, it sounds nice, and I might want to do that, but it's erased my blue ones now. So one thing that we can do with the different emitters, one of the settings that we have in the toggle placement here, or just the placement setting, is that we can set them to lock, which means that I can only turn them on and off when I am using this emitter to play. So now if I come into my twinkly emitter, I can play over the top of my blue ones without it deleting what was there, which is, again, a lovely performance thing now. So I also want to be able to set up an emitter type which essentially does kind of like pure looping of a phrase, but kind of granular looping. So not like looping, but granular looping. So I'm going to record into one of these end tracks here, something that's more sort of obviously something like that, perhaps. So yeah, I'll do it on 7. Hearing any of that because obviously we haven't got a emitter down there, but we could play our pink one across that, which is lovely. But I don't want to use that one. I want to set up a new emitter, so I'm going to come into 3. I'm going to place an emitter. Let's set it to toggle. Toggle placement. Turn up an octave. Not quite as much into the effects. Cool. Now, as I mentioned, one of the ways that we can move the emitter around is with this relative X and Y, and this literally just moves where you are relative to where you placed it, right? So I'm now 2 emitters away, and a bit, 2 and a bit emitters away actually. So what we can do is modulate this with a sawtooth wave, and that basically gives us a loop through the emitter. So if I come over here and go to another modulator, set it to be a sawtooth running slowly, not quite that slowly. Set my target to be the 3rd emitter's relative Y. Set the size to be 0.5. And what we now have, you should be able to see it moving through. That emitter is moving about through the sample now. Which is cool. Probably slower than that. And we can edit the emitter to be, I think probably, we want it to be a lot more dense than that. And for the grain length to be much shorter. So now that is looping through that sample essentially. And we could go and place one of these anywhere and use it to loop a sample directly. Though I think actually in reality we probably don't want to be quite as regimented. So I think with all of these things adding a bit of a jitter to everything is a good idea. But I also think in this case I'll add a bit of spray Y. So it sort of randomly jumps out to nearby parts of its loop. I could probably also normalize this. That was already normalized. And again, if we want this to be something that is sat there looping, probably want to lock it, which will be over here. If we want to create a bit more movement in our loop, we might also consider doing something like modulating the tone. Or let's also jitter to the panning as well. Always jitter to the panning. If we wanted this to go backwards, I would presume we could do that with the size by making it -5 instead. Yeah. So everything I've done so far has been based around recording stuff into the tracks and having various different emitter types on the go. But there's an alternative way of setting up the recording here, which is also really cool, which is the live grains mode. You can alter this in the middle of a session as well. So if I pop, this is currently empty, isn't it? If I pop down a couple of blue ones. No, let's actually set up a separate emitter to do this. So I'm going to set up a emitter here. I'm just going to sort of free do this for a second. We'll tweak it in a second. Where we have the octave jumps. We have a nice bit of jitter there. Take off a little bit of the bottom end. And a bunch of spray Y. Something like that. Yeah. So I'll just pop one of those. Also want them to toggle. Toggle. Okay. So I've got a couple of emitters down here that's going to do some stuff, right? If I arm this track now, while we're in live grain mode, it's going to be constantly recording new stuff in, right? In a loop, essentially. So I can start playing stuff in here, and it will start to just affect what I'm playing in, like an effects pedal, a bit like the microcosm. I take off these other emitters for a second. we've just got like an octave up effects unit here, doing spatialization and going through the effects. And the neat thing here is that when I choose to stop the recording, that's now saved into the buffer like a normal recording. So I can perform and then snatch something that I like the sound of. And now that's in there. And now I have a performable, effectable, loopable, beddable set of tools for building out a performance. And now I can hold ideas in Tempura while I retune the lyra and move on to other stuff. And I think that is super cool. That's how I'm going to use it. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, this kind of reminds me of the Oct track in that once you've configured it this particular way, you can save this canvas, as it's called in the Tempura, and you have a performance environment that you can go back to and use in that particular type of performance. If you want something that's going to be more geared towards just playing soundscapes or slicing beats, you can just set up different canvases for those different use cases. And it's all like a granular friend that can do different useful things. In a very tactile way. As I mentioned, the way I'll probably use this is more on the send of a mixer with more stuff. And all of these different emitters that I've spent time setting up during this video, they'll already be there for me to just bring things in to the different tracks and start to build out a performance. I haven't touched on every single feature by any stretch of the imagination. One thing that I should mention is that you have macros that you can set up which can affect multiple different things all at once. So if you wanted to set it up so that these blue emitters, which are naturally quite sparse, can be brought up to be more dense as part of the performance, you can definitely do that. I've also literally just been holding one single note the entire time. You can play other notes, of course, and those notes have their own, as I mentioned, envelopes separate to the fade in, fade out of the emitters. So you could also use this as a way to modulate to new keys if you're retuning stuff and you don't want to be playing the same note the entire time. So, yeah, Tempura can be lots of different things. This is what it's going to be for me most of the time, but I'm interested to hear how you think you might use it, or if you are a Tempura user or owner, both, already, how you use yours, or do you use it in lots of different guises? Perhaps you do. Anyway, the video is already longer than I intended, but that should be no surprise to anybody. If you enjoyed the video, as always, a like, a subscribe is massively appreciated. But I think other than that, it's time to say, as always, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Sorry for a massive gap between videos. Life did life things. And until next time, take care.